Welcome back to another episode of Life in Alberta and our fantasy hockey draft. This is the second episode that we're recording today. It's the fourth episode in our series, and we've got one more after this where we'll answer some of the viewer questions that I've got. And if you have any questions about fantasy hockey and especially Dynasty Leagues, make sure you leave a comment, make sure you send me an email, and we will address them in the next episode. So, once again, our fantasy guru in the leagues that I am in and very successful in Yahoo Fantasy Hockey, we have Frank for our second episode of today. How you doing this late evening in Montreal?
Doing great. Still have energy, so that's pretty good.
Hey, good for a couple older guys like ourselves. So let me ask you a couple questions before we get into the next dynasty exploration. Montreal Canadiens, you've been a fan probably all your life. Has there ever been another Montreal or another NHL team that you've rooted for other than Montreal?
No.
No? Okay.
I've had
And
secondary teams,
yeah,
but no. And
okay.
the secondary teams are far, far away. It's always a Canadian team out west.
Okay. Are you of the mentality that if Montreal is out, you'll cheer for another Canadian team or not?
Yes, if they're not the Leafs.
All right, let's get on to today's episode. Again, we are here to talk fantasy hockey. We're here to talk dynasty leagues. And again, just a quick little refresher that if you're in a dynasty league and you're invited to join one later in the season, really take a look at the construction of the roster that you're getting. And sometimes you get a really good team, a competitive team, and sometimes you get a team that you have to put a little bit of research and work into it. So again, most dynasty managers will have a separate website. If they're using Yahoo for the main site, they'll have a separate site for the farm team. And again, go back, watch episode number 3. We go through pro boards and how it's set up, rules of leagues, the different things that managers will allow you to do and some of the punishments if you break the rules. That's all in the previous episode. Last episode, we looked at the construction of a pretender, a team that is rebuilding or should rebuild, and things that you should do. Today, we're going to look at a middle of the road team. They're not the greatest, but they're not the worst. And Frank said this is kind of your middle 4 teams in a 12-team league.
Yeah.
So,
Either
Frank,
they're
I
not
will.
making they're going to be the fifth and sixth team in the playoffs, or they're going to be the seventh or eighth team. So they get a bye in the consolation. So and from year to year they can switch. So they're not dominant, but they don't suck. And it's like, okay, how do you take that middle team and make it a contender? Because we looked at how to take a pretender and bring it to the middle. And that's basically how to, because going back to the previous episode, get the talent in. Once you do that, you become a middle. And now, what do you do as a middle to take the next step? And there's two strategies we'll look at. So that's what we're going to look at. Once you get there, or if you inherit a middle of the pack team, what do you do?
Okay. And again, just as we mentioned in the last episode, we are using my team, Frank's team, and Wes's, the co commissioner of the league. We're looking at those 3 teams and again, the 3 different levels. And using Frank's advice from the last episode, my team right now is in 9th place. So it's, below the halfway mark. And Frank said, when you take over a team, go back at least one season, see where that team finished in the standings. And in terms of my league, we were 9th. So we are right on par this year with where we are last year. So we're not one of the lowest teams. We're kind of right at the bottom of that middle kind of category.
Yeah.
So where do you want to take us, Frank?
And the reason why I put you as a middle team is you won the consolation round. So you beat uh, the bottom six half teams in the playoffs last
Right. I
year.
didn't even realize that. So
I think you
where
did.
are we here?
Did I? Or
Oh, the
my
consolation. Yeah, I'm looking at the championship here.
hopefully I'm not. My brain didn't short circuit.
No, I won the ninth place game.
Oh, okay.
The Mighty Duck. So yeah,
Oh,
I
so
came third.
you finished ninth and you finished ninth. Okay.
Yeah.
All
So
right.
I'm consistent, Frank. I'm really consistent.
All right. So now you know ninth team, ninth team. So not super, but it qualifies as a middle team. So now let's go to the Excel first. So I did the same thing as I did in the previous episode. I ranked the roster. Well, I didn't rank. I just put the ages because ages are very important to figure out what to do with your players. So here's your team with the ages on the right, so you can see that before you hit the 30s, you actually hit the 40s, which is Craig Anderson, and he's in pink. And the reason he's in pink is quite obvious. Um, he's 41. So yeah, Phil Kessel, yeah, because I changed him on my thing because you made a move in between the production of the Excel. So you replace Phil Kessel with a Ryan Graves. So Ryan Graves is 27, so Phil Kessel at 35. He's gone now, so he was in pink. And
So
then
see, I already made moves in anticipation of this episode, Frank. So that's how forethinking I am.
yes, because you know I was going to ding you because you had 5 Ds. We have 6 starting defensemen. So being short a D is you're on a surplus elsewhere, but that surplus might not play, whereas your D plays every game that week. So at least you made that. You're fully stocked on defensemen. But if we continue your list, you hit David Krejci before you hit another 30s. So that's why you're in the middle. You don't have all these vets that are 30, 31, 32, 33, 34 that are still productive. You know, you kind of went through a mini readjustment. So you have people in their early, mid, late 20s. So that's your team right now. You have 2 obvious drops, which is Craig Anderson, but that doesn't mean you drop him. It's not part of your future, and you had to add him to get starts for your team. And then you have David Krejci, a 1-year deal. He went to Europe, came back, so he's not there long term. So he's not somebody you're going to look at for the future. So your team is okay in terms of age. So let's look at your farm down below. So you have your first 4 are forwards. So you have Turcotte, who's ranked 41 on Dauber. So we went through that. Dauber for prospects, they have a ranking for forwards, top 200. They have a top 50 defensemen on a separate list. Those two come out monthly. And then they have twice a year a top 50 goaltender prospect. So that is the rankings I put in for Glenn's farm. So Turcotte is 41, ranked 41. Then you have Matt Savoy at 76. Afanasiev, I suck pronouncing names. You'll get them. You'll get that problem in every episode. 116th. Alex Newhook, he's graduated, so he played in the NHL last year. So Dauber has some rules where he graduates players. Then we hit your defenseman, Mintikov. Minty, let's go and give them their
I
nickname.
always draft players so that Frank can't pronounce them, just so you know.
Yeah. So he's a new draftee, but he still made the top 50 at 35. Caden Goulet, who's my homie, 8th. Broberg, 9th. And Eric Brandstrom, who's graduated. And then we hit the goalie. So you got Kosa, he's 14th. Hoffer, 12th. Kochetkov, 19th. And Dylan Garin, 34th. That's your G. And then we go back to the forwards. You have Yurov and Amirov, 2 Russians, 144 and 86th. So looking at here, you see you have 4 pink lines. So to me, Alex Turcotte is on his way to bust out. There's no room. He's a center. Kaliev and Kupari, Gabe Villardi, all centers. Villardi got moved to a winger. He's a big dude, so he's having very good success this year. But there's no room. It's all about opportunity. And LA, when they sign Dano, the top 2 centers with Kopitar and Dano. So there's no more opportunity. So for me, that's a replacement just because but he hasn't been producing in the AHL. So he's a disappointment all the way through, but he also does not have the opportunity, and he's not going to be a winger, an effective winger. And this is where you have to bring in your own touch to all the scouting reports. You start getting the scouting reports the year of the draft, at the draft, and then post draft. Dauber always has blurbs. If you click on a player in a ranking, you can pick anyone. Just click on anyone, and then you'll see he ranks on the right, NHL certainty and upside on the right. On the right, don't move. It's on the right, the blue box. See, there's rankings. I can't see them because they're too small. So what are those numbers? Oh, there you go. I can't see. You got to move. There you go. So see this player, 8.5 fantasy upside. So that translates to 85 point upside, and NHL certainty 9.5. So you have those, but the blurb is on the left. So if you go on the left of the website, there you go. That's the blob. So you always have a little paragraph, and down below, click to expand. You have other blurbs throughout time with the month they were done. So that's great to go read, and you have to make up your own mind. And Alex Turcotte, from the beginning on his draft year, his skating and his quickness was always deficient. And you can learn to skate better, but you can't learn to be quick. And if I'll put in an example of it's the fast twitch muscles, that's what makes you quick. You cannot. Michael Johnson was a great 200 meter and 400 meter runner. He got world records, gold medals, but he couldn't run the 100. Same thing, Carl Lewis won the 100, couldn't have the stamina to do the 200. He did some, but the 400 he couldn't. And that's where quickness, you cannot learn to be quick. You cannot take a 400 meter runner or a marathon runner and make them a champion 100 meter runner. So that's Turcotte. That's why I have him in pick. Afan, whatever, Igor. I didn't know him. I researched him. He's on the Predators. Nothing excites me from what I say. He's big, so he's big. So I would look to replace him. And then you have Broberg and Brandstrom. So they're very similar reasons why I put them in pink. And Broberg is 10th ranked defenseman. So if he doesn't get traded, he's probably not gonna meet expectations of his draft. And that's because he has no opportunity. He has Barry in front of him, and then Bouchard he has in front of him. Darnell Nurse, he's a top pairing D, etc. There's no room for the guy. And you have 2 Oilers D. So if you graduate him, you're at 3. So you have 6 defenseman positions on your roster. And are you going to really have half of them from one team? I would really not suggest it. You have 1 defenseman usually, sometimes 2 on power play 1. And then it's either 1 and 1, but you're not going to get 3 top producers on the same team unless you're the Avalanche. Are you going to gamble because you're being a middle team, you should use those assets that you've identified that are not core to your success, and you try to get an asset that helps you today.
Okay. So you're not necessarily mean drop them.
No,
You're saying try to trade them for an asset.
get rid of them doesn't mean
Okay.
drop them. It could be trading, and you're a middle team, so you have to look at your team, and then you have to see how can I improve that team to compete a little bit more. I don't have geezers, and one thing you must realize in fantasy hockey, anybody that's over 30 is very hard to trade. There's ageism in Dynasty, especially Dynasty Fantasy Hockey. If you're north of 30, nobody wants you, and except me, because that's how I win. Because I remember getting Iginla at 32. The guy was offering him to everybody around the league. He was getting ridiculous offer. I got Iginla and pennies on the dollar, and it allowed me to win more. When you're in the beginning of the year, what I like to use is average stats to look at if your player is producing. Because if you have total stats, at one point, Arizona had played 7 games and the Blues had played 3. So all the Blues, rank wise, were down below. So average, you have your outliers that only played 1 game, but it's a good proxy. You have the brains to forget the ones that have played 1 game and had 4 shots on goals. So if you click on average stats, let's look at your team player by player. So just go to Sunday so we have the same page, because I'm on Sunday, because I wanted your new
Sunday.
addition,
Okay.
because I don't want to look at Kessel. All right. So we start. So we click on average stats and then we look at your team. So since the beginning of the year, we see disappointments. Ryan Stromey, 350th. Anybody after 300 is a disappointment, and everybody in the top 300, depending on who they are. So Stromey is underperforming, but sometimes Yahoo stats, they reward certain categories more than others. Your defensemen, you want them at 40-point defensemen. That's when they're useful. So 40 point is half a point a game. Forwards, you want more than half a point a game, unless the stat fill elsewhere. So if you look at Stromey, he's averaging 73 .73 points per game. So he's getting dinged. Why? Because you kind of figure out the Yahoo algorithms. He's minus half a minus per game, so that dings him, and he doesn't shoot. So that's why. But if you look at his points, he's at 3/4. That's acceptable. So the 350 look bad, that becomes a check mark. Roslovich, 437. And see here, you see he's under half a point a game. Um, doesn't shoot either, 145, no power play points. Does face offs, hits a little bit, but you can see he doesn't bring a lot to the table. So even though he's at the right age, he's on the hit list because Columbus is a bad team. So when you have a bad team, you have the first line like Montreal, Caulfield, and Suzuki are producing. Now you have Kirby Doc at 10 points, and then the next one is 6 and then below. So on bad teams, you want to stick with the talented first liners. When you get to great teams like the Avs, you can sometimes go to the third liner to get a productive player. So Roslovich is somebody that has to be on the hit list because a forward that's below half a point a game better be bringing other stats to the table. 3 shots per game, 2 hits per game, like a multi-cat stat to compensate, and he's not. Okay. Is it a slump? Beautiful. You press the little square beside his name, and you see he's at 45 points in 81 games. So that's barely above half a point a game. When he got to Columbus, great. But when he was in Winnipeg, he was under 30 points. So he had a great time when he got traded. He's a Columbus resident, but then he reverted back to half a point per game. So he becomes on the hit list. You got to replace him if
Yeah.
you want to become a contender. So you go through the list. I won't go through player by player because we'll be here for a long time. But you see Seth Jarvis at 390. He gets a pass. He was a rookie last year, having a little bit more trouble. We have the sophomore slumps, but he's still at 54 points per game, 2 shots. So he's early 20s. So you something that's somebody that you keep for the future. So going down the list. So going down, Bouchard not getting the opportunity. You can see the ice time. This is pretty cool. Break even. Three pairs of D, 60 minutes. That's 20 minutes each. So you can see Bouchard is playing less than his regular shift. And right below, Nurse is playing 23, so he's playing more. So when the more you're on the ice, the better it is. And forwards, it's 15 minutes the cutoff. So you see Yamamoto, 17 minutes. So he's getting more than his regular shift, 1, 2, 3, 4, playing with the top 5 best player in the world. And he's got zero 0.3 points per game, just assists, shooting 1.4. He's got more hits, as many hits as he does shot on goals. You can't score when you hit somebody.
Yeah.
So, but you see Adrian Kempe right above at 18 minutes 16. So those are good signs. And Jarvis, you can see he's a sophomore. He's young, but he's still getting his regular shift, 15 minutes. So going back to your D. Oh, so now I see you have an injury. So that's why you have a D. Oh, yeah, boy, I'm Biram. Okay, so you still have 5 Ds. So I'm going to nail you on that. So we go Slavin. Horrible at 440, but he's playing 23 minutes. So him, you go, what's going on? He's shooting 2.55 shots per game. What's going on with him? So if you click on his name, you go look, and you see last year he had 42 points. So that's the half a point a game that we're looking for a D. The year before, a little bit less, but the year before, 36 and 68, and then 30, 30, 30, consistently there. So he has a lot of block shots, some hits. So he has his usefulness. It's just this year, two things might have happened. Incoming player, Brent Burns. So you can see last year he had 7 power play points because Tony D'Angelo was there. And now it's Brent Burns. Is Brent Burns getting all of his ice time? That's something to look at to see if this is just an early season slump versus a new trend in a player. Okay. So that I have not researched, but he's 28. So he's still on the right side of 30. So that's something where I wouldn't panic because sometimes you do have to show patience. And Slavin is still blocking shots. He's almost has 2 shots per game. But I would go look at out of the 23 minutes, is he getting any power play points? And a great site for that is NHL.com, player stats, and you can go look total ice time. So I would investigate Slavin a little bit more.
All right, Frank. Well, now that we've looked at the Excel file at this team here and the farm team, we've looked at Dauber and the different rankings at the prospects on Dauber. What would you say for a new manager coming in, taking over my team that I currently have? What is the next step?
So we've looked at the Excel, we looked at the ages of your team, identified a couple of problem areas. We went on your team, looked at the average you should keep, even though their rankings might be low. So the next step is looking at your overall team. So like we did in the previous video, we'll do the same thing here. So you go to this great feature, which is team stats. So when you get into a league, it's the second little tab below the black bar. It says team stats, and then we go and find your team. So I'll do it from my computer at the same time as you. So when we click team stats, we start with the skater by default. It's the win and loss. And then on the right, you have totals. So if we look to have a general picture, we look at your team, you're right smack in the middles for goals, 2 wins, 1 loss. Opposite for assist, 1 loss, 1 win, sorry, 2 losses. And we go around 2-1, 1-2, 1-2, 1-2, 2-1, 0-3, 2-1. So you're a middle team, and that shows it here. We're only 3 weeks in, but hits 0 and 3. So let's see if it's a problem area or if you got beat by 1 hit per week. So that is also something you need to look at. So if we look at the totals and we click on hits, we'll see if that is an area you could improve short term. And we look, and you are fourth to last at 189. So in 3 weeks, you're about 7 hits per week behind the middle teams, which is myself and Team Awesomeness. So that's something you can look at when you look at trades, just to make yourself a little bit more competitive for hits. And if we click on some of the other stats, so we click on face off, you're right smack in the middle. Blocks, we look, and you are fifth to last, so seventh. So again, in that middle range, shots on goal, we'll see here you are third to last. So here you looked at your record, but here it's another area you can improve. High volume shooters, and in a perfect world, you would find somebody that shoots with somebody that hits. Then you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. So your plus and minus is actually very good. You're second in the league, but you have 7. Uh, so the first place team has 28. So, but that my personal choice. I never look at plus or minus, as I said before. And then if we look at assists, you're actually again fourth to last. So you're okay in goals. So that's where you identify, okay, if I'm going to do a trade for short term for this year, this is what I have to look at when I do my trades. If you do a trade for the long term, if you go the patient route, then you can use other tactics of just keep bringing talent in as a pretender would do. So let's go look at your goaltenders. We
Okay,
saw that
before
you
we
had.
do that, Frank, before we
Yes.
do that, I think a new manager might ask, well, okay, if you want to improve in the weaker categories, what do you sacrifice? What do you give up to improve in the other? Do you, for example, plus minus because this team is second in plus minus, do you kind of try and deal those players away, or how do you balance that out then?
No, because nobody's ever gonna trade a player because he's a plus. Uh, Plus player is 1 year or minus. So what you do is you could have somebody that's okay in goals, etc. But what you have to do is add uh, the farm players that we identified that were not key to your future. So you add that as a sweetener to improve a specific stat.
Okay, I
So
got you.
that's the way I would do it. Is you have your key pieces and you have all the surrounding pieces. The surrounding pieces are not what you need to succeed. And when we get to my team, we'll see how a contender gets built. Um, and you'll see that my starting team, I have no benches that will go in front of these guys. They are pure, surefire starters, and that's what you have to build towards. And then have benches for odd stats and odd starts here and there. So I would not go, oh, I have goals. I'll trade goals for hits, because then you'll improve hits, but you'll devalue your goals. So it's looking at teams that have holes that would need these types of players, and then you do 2 for 1s.
Okay, makes sense. So we'll move on to the goaltenders then. And
And
what
we
would you
saw
like to?
yesterday you had a bunch of goaltenders because you're kind of unlucky with all your goaltender in the past couple of years. And then we see it here. For wins, well, you're actually tied with a bunch of teams, but there's only one team that's worse than the bunch of you at 7 wins. But if we look at goals against average, I'm in totals again. Let's do wins and losses first. So if we look at your wins and losses, you're 1-2 for wins, 2-1 for goals against average, 3-0 for saves. I was, oh no, 0-3. I looked at the wrong line. 0-3 for
Wrong one.
saves.
Yeah.
That makes sense. 1-2 for save percentage, and 0-1-2 for shutouts. So if we switch to totals now, okay, so wins again, 2 ahead of last place. If we look at goals against average, it's actually surprising. You're fifth at 268. So if you look at other teams that are in trouble for goalies, like the team from yesterday, the previous video. So the team from the Pretender, we saw he had trouble in goals, but you can see his goals against average is a full goal above yours at 365. So he went with volume. You're actually having great stats because of Craig Anderson and Buffalo are doing so well. And then you had Samsonov that was doing well until he got hurt. But if
And
we look at
Stuart Skinner's had a good
yes,
start this year.
yeah, and his spot start. So you have 3 guys that have great statistics to start the year. But if we look at saves, we can see the Pretender with his awful goals against average, and you can see the first place team here is Winnipeg, and on the previous screen he was last in goals against average. So those two are leading for saves. So they went all volume, crappy goalies, and you can see that in the save percentage. So 768, 618, they're leading the pack, and we can see you are last at 347. So not a little bit behind. You are a lot behind because Craig Anderson has had less starts than Comrie. Samsonov was not the starter until Murray got injured, and Skinner is not the starter. So that's natural. So we know that's something you need to work on. So that's not surprising. But, and that's the beauty of goaltenders. As long as you meet the minimum requirements, you can be competitive. You won't be competitive in wins. You won't be competitive in saves, but you can be competitive in goals against average and save percentage because, again, your save percentage, you're third. So that's 2 out of the 5 stats. Shutouts are very rare, but if you can go 2-3 in your goalie when you don't have a surefire starter, a Vasilevsky, sure, the guy from the Rangers, I can never say his name, Sorokin, etc. But you can still be competitive. So if you go 2-2-1, usually people tie the shutouts. You have 9 offensive categories to go get yourself 5 extra wins. So that's where goalies, if you don't have a lot of volume, you can still be competitive. Whereas skaters, defensemen, and forwards, you don't have that luxury. So when you go add goaltenders, you look at goals against average and save percentage, and that's where a quality backup on a good team is worth more to you than a number one starter on a crappy team like Chicago, like Arizona.
Okay. So that makes sense. And so someone taking over this team should not worry on the goalies. The goalies, are adequate because it is getting that 2-2 split in most weeks because dominating 2 categories, but really weak in 2 categories, and shutouts can be a toss up. So their focus should be on the forwards or defensemen.
Yes, correct. And always keep in mind the goalies because you have to get starters. surefire starters eventually. So that's something, but it's not something you need to work at. It's not urgent for this year. So you can look at the farm, see if somebody's going to graduate. And in your case, what we saw earlier, the closest goalie to the NHL is Joel Hofer, because Bennington is doing awful again. That's 2 years in a row. They don't have Husso. They have Grice, who's 32. So Hofer might get a chance in the next year or two. So he's the closest one. So you have to gauge that. So always keep a lookout for goalies, but it's not something to say, okay, if I want to make the playoffs and compete, give myself a chance for the trophy. You start by putting all your energies in the forwards and defensemen, in your case.
Okay.
And
Yeah,
we saw
and that makes sense.
yesterday was complete opposite. That team has to improve. Will stay a pretender as long as the goaltenders are bad, because they only compete in saves, basically, because bad teams don't win and bad goalies have bad GAAs and bad save percentage. So that is one category only. That's not enough, and that's why they're pretenders.
Okay, so that makes sense then. Someone taking over this team, leave the goalies alone. You've got some good goalies coming up in the system. I mean, if an offer comes along for a bona fide starter, you might want to consider it, because then you are going to bring up your wins and your save categories, but it definitely isn't a priority.
Correct. And then you
Okay.
can take over another middle team. That's another story where the goalies are problematic. I've seen unbalanced team where all the talent is in the goalies and not in the starters, in the skaters, or everything is the skaters and there's nothing in the goalie. And that's teams that drafted skaters before goalies, or those that went goalies to start, and then they have nothing left up front. So you have those imbalances, and those are easy to solve, because especially if you have good goaltender, because everybody's always looking for good goaltenders and they'll pay a premium for them. But if you're short goaltenders, you're going to have to overpay. You always have to overpay for quality goaltending in Dynasty. Goalies are such a valuable commodity. It's hard to trade for them, but you have to keep trying, because you never know. We'll see in the next episode about contenders that it's not impossible to get goalies. Sometimes you have to pick up the phone and just ask.
Last question I have for you, Frank. If a manager is coming in and replacing someone, is there kind of a built-in deadline to the league? I know each league has a trading deadline, but is there like a 20 game, 30 game, 40 game mark where you've got to make that move, or can it be done anytime during the season?
Replacing a manager can be done on the last day of the season. So there's no limit. If you have somebody that says, I'm not coming back next year, it's better to if you can replacing him before the league shuts down. When you reopen, the new manager's emails is already on the upload. So when you start up the league, so it's better to do that than during the summer, because then you have to manually input the person's email. But you can do it at any time.
All right. Cool. And again, as we mentioned last episode, if you are looking to get in a Dynasty League, send me an email, leave a comment. I can add you to a waiting list and get your name to Frank. And again, if you are a Jets fan, a Canucks fan, a Flames fan, Ottawa Senators fan, and you want to join our regular podcast, we try and have one every month, every couple months. And if you want to join the conversation, again, get a hold of me. We'd love to have more Canadian hockey fans as part of our podcast. So drop me a note, send me an email, and I'll get a hold of you. Frank, thank you so much as we end off episode number 4. We've got one more to go where we'll look at the other side of it, the contenders and the path that Frank has taken to build up the current team that he has. Plus, we'll answer viewer mail. So thank you, Frank. Thanks everyone for watching the Average Albertan Podcast. And stay tuned. In a couple weeks, we will have our regular show, and we'll have one more episode. Probably we'll film it in the next week and have that up very soon as well. Have a wonderful weekend, a wonderful night. Don't forget, Frank, change your clock 1 hour back tonight. And we'll see you next episode.
Extra sleep. Woo!
Now we can stay up and record the 5th episode.
All right. Have a good evening.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.